What if the one military strategy a nation spent 20 years building, the one they believed could stop the most powerful navy on Earth, fell apart in a single night? That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what happened in the Strait of Hormuz. And the consequences are still unfolding in ways most people have not been told about. Before we go any further, if you care about real geopolitical analysis, the kind that actually explains what is happening beneath the headlines, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss a breakdown like this one. And if someone you know needs to understand what is shifting in the Middle East, share this video with them. Now let us get into it. The Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through that slim corridor moves a massive share of the world's daily oil supply. Tankers carrying crude to China, Japan, India, South Korea, and Europe all pass through this single bottleneck. Naval strategists describe operating inside it as fighting in a hallway. There is almost no room to maneuver. Civilian ships are everywhere, and the sensors that military vessels rely on are constantly overwhelmed by the noise of commercial traffic. Iran understood all of this. In fact, Iran built an entire military doctrine around it. For 2 decades, Iranian military planners studied American naval power and came to a clear conclusion. They could not match the United States in a conventional fight. Not carrier groups against carrier groups, not destroyer against destroyer. That battle was already lost before it began, so Iran chose a different kind of battle entirely. The doctrine they developed had a name inside military circles: asymmetric saturation. The idea was elegant in its logic. You do not need to destroy your enemy's weapons if you can destroy their ability to make decisions fast enough to use those weapons. And in a confined, chaotic environment like the Strait of Hormuz, decision-making speed becomes the most fragile link in any defensive chain. The plan was never about firepower. It was about overload. Think about what that means in practice. Imagine you are the commander of a naval convoy escort. You are tracking dozens of fast-moving surface contacts weaving between commercial tankers. At the same time, your radar is picking up low-flying drones skimming the water at multiple altitudes. Beneath your convoy, sonar is detecting faint submarine shadows slipping in and out of resolution. And your data links, the digital nervous system connecting every sensor on every platform, are being hit with bursts of electronic jamming from the Iranian coastline. All of this is happening at once. All of it demands a response. And every second you spend deciding is a second the threat gets closer. That was Iran's theory of victory, not destruction, paralysis. On the night this engagement unfolded, Iran executed that plan with real precision. Fast attack boats launched from the coastline in dispersed formations, accelerating toward the convoy from multiple directions at once. Behind them came smaller drone boats, running almost invisible just above the waterline, using the density of commercial shipping as cover. Beneath the convoy lanes, Ghadir-class submarines shifted into ambush posture, exploiting the acoustic noise of heavy tanker traffic to mask their presence from sonar systems. And above everything, Shahed loitering munitions entered the battle space at altitude, designed to blend into civilian radar returns and confuse the tracking picture. Within the opening minutes, the coalition defensive network was doing exactly what Iran had designed the attack to make it do. It was splitting attention in every direction at once: surface contacts, air threats, underwater movement, electronic interference, each layer real, each demanding immediate response. The battle space picture was fragmenting under pressure, and Iran's planners were watching it happen exactly as the doctrine said it would. There was a moment in the opening phase when things genuinely looked dangerous for the coalition. A P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft moved into the northern sector of the strait and began dropping sonobuoys along underwater approach corridors, picking up faint acoustic traces of the Ghadir submarines. For a brief window, the defensive picture began to stabilize. And then Iran activated its next layer. Coastal electronic warfare stations switched from probing bursts to wide-area interference across multiple sectors simultaneously. The data links connecting the Poseidon, the escort destroyers, and the fighter aircraft supporting the convoy began breaking down under jamming pressure. Radar tracks started lagging. Contacts disappeared from one sensor node and reappeared offset on another. Coalition crews were forced to manually verify targets, rather than relying on the automated fusion systems that make a modern kill chain function at the speed combat demands. For a few critical seconds, the entire defensive network lost synchronization, and Iran chose that exact window to release its second wave. A fresh formation of drones spread into looser patterns, pushing further into the battle space, stretching the already strained defensive picture across a wider area at precisely the moment when the coalition was struggling to recover from the electronic warfare surge. Iran had not just launched a swarm. It had disrupted the rhythm of the American kill chain at the moment it was beginning to recover. And the clock was running. The swarm was closing. The defensive network was fragmented. Everything the doctrine had promised was unfolding in real time. Then something happened that Iran had not planned for. Something appeared in the battle space that Iranian radar operators could not fully see, not because their equipment was malfunctioning, but because what had just entered the fight was specifically built to be invisible to them. F-35C Lightning II, stealth fighters from coalition carrier groups pushed directly into the engagement corridor. Their radar systems operated in a mode specifically designed to avoid triggering detection, appearing as brief ghost signals that dissolve back into background noise before any stable targeting lock could form. Iranian operators could sense something was there. They could not identify it. They could not track it. They could not target it. But the F-35Cs could see everything. Using their onboard sensor fusion capability, the stealth fighters began pulling together fragmented data from every platform in the battle space. The Poseidon, the escort destroyers, satellite feeds, airborne battle management systems. They were not just flying through the engagement zone. They were actively reconstructing the coalition's broken operational picture in real time, under live jamming, in the exact and electromagnetic environment Iran had designed to prevent that kind of recovery. Drones that had been invisible inside civilian radar clutter suddenly appeared clearly on coalition displays. Weapons locks formed. Engagements began. And the swarm that had been closing toward the convoy started disappearing from the battle space, not because the coalition had been lucky, but because the coalition's most important asset had just rebuilt the nervous system the jamming had torn apart. Iran's commanders were watching their battle space, picture shift in ways their planning had never modeled. And the coalition was not done. Holding a rear support position behind the convoy, a British Type 45 destroyer had been observing the engagement, waiting for the precise moment when its specific capabilities would matter most. That moment had arrived. The Type 45 accelerated toward the center of the fight and activated its Samson radar, sweeping the entire air and surface picture around the convoy. What made this critical was not just the power of the radar itself, it was the method. Where Iranian jamming had been attacking the single-track continuity that American sensor systems depended on, the British system rebuilt the picture through multi-source cross-verification. It did not need a clean, continuous track. It could confirm targets by comparing data from multiple independent sources simultaneously. Targets that had been drifting and disappearing under electronic warfare pressure began stabilizing across coalition displays. Drone movement vectors became clear. Surface contacts were reclassified with precision. The data links between the Poseidon, the F-35Cs, and the American destroyers began resynchronizing. The kill chain that Iran had spent the opening phase of the battle carefully dismantling was being rebuilt faster than Iran could continue taking it apart. This is the moment the engagement fundamentally changed. The Type 45's Sea Viper system launched Astra missiles toward multiple aerial targets, hitting drones before they reached the convoy's outer defensive layer. A small cluster managed to push through and close toward the escort formation, forcing an Arleigh Burke destroyer to maneuver directly alongside the tankers as a physical last line of defense. For a few seconds, it appeared Iran had forced a breach inside the coalition's inner defensive ring. Then Sea Viper fired again. Every remaining contact vanished from coalition displays. The breach closed. And from that point forward, Iran was no longer setting the tempo of the battle. The coalition was. What followed was methodical, in a way the chaotic opening phase had made seem almost unreachable just minutes earlier. The remaining elements of Iran's swarm were dismantled layer by layer. Surviving drones and drone boats appeared only in scattered clusters, no longer carrying enough density or coordination to challenge a restored defensive network. F-35Cs pushed deeper into the engagement corridor, targeting the final coordination nodes of the Iranian swarm. The Poseidon maintained continuous targeting updates. The Type 45 held the battlespace picture stable. Iran made a final attempt to cover its withdrawal using fast boats and scattered aerial elements. Sea Viper fired one more time. The last contacts disappeared. The battle was over. Now, if this kind of deep analysis is something you value, the real story beneath the military headlines, take 5 seconds right now. Drop a comment below telling me what you think Iran's next move will be. Smash the like button if this breakdown is giving you clarity that the mainstream coverage is missing. And subscribe with notifications on, because what comes next in this region is going to move fast. Let us talk about what the outcome actually means. Because the significance of what happened in the Strait of Hormuz is not just operational, it is strategic, it is doctrinal. And for Iran, it is deeply personal in a way that goes beyond a single military defeat. Iran did not lose because it fought poorly. Iran's execution of the asymmetric saturation plan was technically disciplined. The layering of threats was coordinated. The timing of the electronic warfare surge was precise. The use of civilian maritime traffic as sensor cover was deliberate and sophisticated. By every measure of the doctrine, Iran did what the doctrine required. The plan failed not because Iran made mistakes. It failed because the coalition it was designed to defeat no longer fights the way the doctrine was designed to exploit. That distinction matters enormously. When a military strategy fails because of poor execution, you can fix the execution. You retrain. You adjust timing. You improve coordination. When a strategy fails because the underlying assumptions about your enemy were wrong, the problem is far deeper. You are not fixing execution. You are rebuilding an entire strategic framework from the ground up. And you are doing it after demonstrating to every observer that your primary deterrent tool does not work. The core assumption of Iran's asymmetric doctrine was that decision-making speed is the decisive vulnerability of any advanced military network. Overwhelm the decision-making chain, and the weapons become irrelevant. Excellent logic. The problem is that it assumed the coalition's decision-making chain would stay overwhelmed once disrupted. It assumed the gap created by electronic warfare would remain open long enough for the swarm to exploit. What the F-35C demonstrated in live combat is that assumption was wrong. The coalition has a capability specifically designed to restore the decision-making chain while under jamming, a capability that is invisible to the radar systems Iran uses to track and target coalition assets. The gap Iran opened was real. The gap closed faster than the swarm could move through it. And once it closed, every Iranian asymmetric advantage began reversing into a disadvantage. Drones that were hidden in civilian radar clutter became visible the moment stealth-enabled sensor fusion rebuilt the tracking picture. Electronic warfare that had fragmented American data links became less effective the moment a British radar system provided independent cross-verification. Submarines exploiting acoustic noise beneath convoy lanes became manageable the moment the sonar chain rebuilt around updated targeting data. Every single advantage in Iran's doctrine depended on one condition. The coalition's network had to stay degraded. It did not stay degraded. The NATO declaration that follows from all of this is not written in diplomatic language. It does not need to be. It is written in the operational reality that the engagement produced. The Strait of Hormuz is under coalition control. The combination of American stealth assets, NATO surface combatants, and integrated maritime patrol aircraft creates a combined fighting capability that Iran's current toolkit cannot defeat, specifically under the conditions Iran's planners considered most advantageous: a confined waterway, saturated civilian traffic, full layered asymmetric pressure from the moment the engagement began. If the plan could not work there, it cannot work anywhere. For the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the question they have been quietly asking for years has now received its clearest possible answer. Is American and NATO capability in the Strait sufficient to actually protect the security of their energy exports? The answer is yes. For China, the calculation is more complicated. Beijing depends heavily on oil moving through Hormuz to power its economy. That flow is now demonstrably more secure under coalition authority than under any scenario where Iranian military pressure succeeds. That reality does not make China enthusiastic about American naval dominance in the Gulf, but it significantly complicates the argument that supporting Iranian strategic ambitions serves Chinese energy interests. When your supply line runs through waters that your strategic competitor just proved it can control, the geopolitical math shifts in uncomfortable ways. For Russia, watching a military partner fail decisively against coalition integration, the lesson is broader than the Persian Gulf. Sensor fusion, stealth-enabled network restoration, interoperable allied platforms that multiply capability beyond what any individual national force can achieve alone. These are not lessons that apply only to the Strait of Hormuz. They are lessons about how the coalition fights, period. And for Iran, the most urgent question is the one analysts and policymakers are watching most carefully right now. When the conventional asymmetric doctrine fails its defining test, what comes next? Iran still has capabilities. Ballistic missiles remain in inventory. Proxy networks across Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria remain available as pressure instruments. The broader asymmetric toolkit has not been fully emptied by a single engagement. But every element of that toolkit has now been tested under the most favorable conditions Iran could construct. And the result is documented, observed, analyzed by every military intelligence service with a stake in the outcome. The search for an alternative does not wait. It begins the moment the last drone contact disappears from the display. What Iran reaches for next will not look like what just failed. History is consistent on this point. When a regime's primary deterrent strategy is publicly disproved, the pressure to restore deterrence through other means becomes intense. And the alternatives that remain accessible when conventional options have been exhausted tend to be less stable, less controllable, and less predictable than what came before. That is the real consequence of what happened in the Strait of Hormuz. Not just a military defeat, not just a doctrinal collapse, a fundamental shift in what Iran believes it can and cannot achieve through force, and a forced reckoning with what tools remain available. The convoy made it through. The coalition controls the strait. The battle demonstrated something that words alone could never have established with the same weight: that the integration of American and NATO capabilities in that waterway produces a combined fighting force that Iran's most sophisticated military planning could not break. Iran spent 20 years building the architecture that failed in a single night. And now, in the silence after the last engagement, Iranian military commanders are not just counting losses, they are confronting something far more unsettling than a tactical defeat. They are confronting the collapse of a doctrine that was supposed to make them untouchable. And everyone watching, every government, every military planner, every strategist calculating risk in the Middle East, is drawing the same conclusion. The Strait of Hormuz has been decided. Not on paper, in the water, under fire, with the whole world watching. And the question that now hangs over every calculation in the region is not whether Iran lost that battle. It is what a regime does when everything it built to guarantee its security has just been proven insufficient. The next move will come, and when it does, it will tell us everything about where this goes from here.